Attention everyone. May I please have your undivided attention across all departments? The voice boomed through the ceiling speakers, sharp and full of static. It echoed down the long, modern hallways of Apex Logistical Solutions, instantly cutting through the usual office hum of keyboard clicks, ringing phones, and casual chatter. I stopped typing mid-sentence and looked up at the small, gray intercom box mounted on my office wall. I knew that voice instantly. It belonged to Bradley Caldwell, our newly appointed Vice President of Global Scale. Bradley had been with the company for less than 3 months, but he had already made it his personal mission to let every single person know he was the alpha executive in the building. Effective immediately, Bradley's voice continued, oozing a cold, calculated smugness that made my skin crawl. We are restructuring our core management team to maximize efficiency. As part of this transition, the role of Director of Operations is being made redundant. Sarah Jenkins is terminated from her position, effective right now. Sarah, you have exactly 10 minutes to clear your desk and exit the premises. Security has already been notified to escort you out if necessary. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the entire floor. I could see my team through the clear glass walls of my office. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A young designer at the desk right outside my door dropped her pen, and the sound of it hitting the thin carpet felt like a gunshot in the dead quiet. 200 employees across 3 distinct floors had just heard me get publicly executed over the loudspeaker. Then, right before the line cut out, the intercom picked up one last sound. Bradley's soft, arrogant chuckle. He wanted everyone to hear him laugh. He wanted every single employee to know exactly how much power he held, and he chose to use me as his public example. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am 38 years old, and for the last 5 years, I have been the Director of Operations and the lead product architect at Apex. I didn't just manage the company, I built our proprietary automated routing platform from a completely blank text document into the multi-million-dollar crown jewel of the entire global shipping industry. I sacrificed my weekends, walked away from family dinners, and worked 80-hour weeks to make this software completely flawless. I kept my head down, did the heavy lifting, and let the results speak for themselves. But in the modern corporate world, quiet diligence is often mistaken for weakness. Bradley saw my lack of corporate flashiness as an invitation to walk all over me. He wanted a grand theater piece to show the board of directors how aggressively he could cut overhead, and I was his chosen sacrifice. As the intercom clicked off, the silence outside my door turned into a wave of panicked whispers. My assistant looked at me through the glass, her eyes wide with horror and watering with tears. But as I slowly stood up from my chair, I wasn't crying. My hands weren't shaking. I felt an icy, crystalline calm wash over me. I wasn't crying because I was busy calculating. Bradley thought he had just staged the ultimate corporate power move. He thought he had successfully flexed his muscles, cleared out an expensive piece of original management, and solidified his position as the undisputed king of Apex. What his arrogant, short-sighted mind had completely failed to check was the master company calendar. I looked down at the luxury watch on my wrist. The digital hands read exactly 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. In exactly 15 minutes, at 2:30 p.m., the executive board was scheduled to log into a secure video conference to finalize our massive $120 million Series C funding round. Our primary investor, a massive private equity firm, was about to sign the final wire transfer documents. Bradley believed that by firing me at 2:15, he would look like a decisive leader when the new capital arrived at 2:30. What he didn't know, what his massive ego had blinded him from checking, was that the entire $120 million check was legally, operationally, and contractually tied to my literal physical presence at this company. By humiliating me in front of 200 people, Bradley hadn't just cleaned out an old employee. He had unwittingly pulled the pin on a financial grenade, dropped it directly into his own lap, and smiled for the cameras. I grabbed a simple cardboard storage box from the bottom drawer of my desk. Methodically, I began placing my personal belongings inside. My favorite coffee mug, a framed picture of my family, and a small notebook where I hand-wrote my initial ideas for our routing system. My team watched me through the glass, their faces pale with shock. A few colleagues stepped forward, offering to help or whispering how sorry they were, but I politely waved them off with a reassuring smile. I didn't want a scene. I wanted an exit that matched the absolute order of my code. I walked down the main hallway, past the rows of cubicles where people quickly looked away, too afraid to lock eyes with the woman who had just been publicly discarded. I walked right past Bradley's corner office. Through his glass door, I saw him leaning back in his leather chair, a massive self-satisfied grin on his face as he swirled a pen between his fingers. He didn't even look out at me. To him, I was already a ghost. A problem erased. The glass doors of the Apex headquarters slid open, and a blast of warm afternoon air hit my face. I walked across the concrete parking lot to my car, placed the cardboard box carefully into the front passenger seat, and climbed into the driver's side. I pulled the heavy door shut, sealing out the noise of the world. I took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around me. I looked down at my watch again. It was precisely 2:15 p.m. The high-stakes closing meeting with our primary investor, Vanguard Holdings, was locked in for 2:30 p.m. Sitting there in the quiet of my car, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of clarity. For the past 6 months, Bradley had been running a systematic campaign of institutional gaslighting against me. He had used every toxic corporate trick in the book. He started by quietly excluding me from critical executive email threads, claiming they were just administrative updates I didn't need to waste time on. Then, during the major quarterly board presentations, he would put up slides containing my proprietary supply chain algorithms and present them as his own innovative strategies for global scaling. When I confronted him privately about it, he gave me a condescending smile and told me that as an operations person, my job was to build the engine, while his job was to sell the car. He had even gone to our chief executive officer behind my back, whispering that operational founders like me were a dime a dozen. He told the CEO that my technical expertise was outdated and that we could easily replace my entire role with cheaper, outsourced labor from overseas to save millions. Bradley truly believed that a fancy executive title gave him absolute, unchallengeable authority over the empire I had spent half a decade building. He thought my quiet nature and my lack of corporate theater meant I lacked real power. He wanted this public execution over the office intercom to secure his position as the uncontested savior of the company right before the massive wave of new capital arrived. But Bradley was a salesman, not an architect. He was a man who lived for the headlines, the press releases, and his impending performance bonus. Because of that, he had never actually taken the time to read the dense, dry legal frameworks that governed our corporate operations. He had no idea what was actually written in the master investment agreement, or how deeply my DNA was woven into the company's financial survival. I reached into my bag and pulled out my personal tablet. It was completely disconnected from the Apex network, meaning Bradley's IT department couldn't lock me out of it. I opened an encrypted local folder containing documents that Bradley had never even bothered to look for. Inside this folder lay my absolute leverage. It was hidden behind deep layers of contract law and technical architecture that a superficial salesman like Bradley could never comprehend. 5 years ago, Apex didn't build our core routing platform. They bought my original startup to get their hands on it. But I wasn't naive. When our corporate attorneys negotiated the acquisition contract, I insisted on inserting a non-negotiable addendum titled Technical Control and Governance. My lawyers told me it was standard protection for a founder, but to me it was an insurance policy against corporate greed. The first part of this addendum was purely technical. The entire core logistics platform operated on a highly secure federated network. Every single day, the system required my personal encrypted digital signature to renew its security compliance certificate. If that certificate wasn't renewed every 24 hours, the system would automatically assume it was under a massive cyber attack. To protect our global clients' sensitive shipping data, the entire automated grid would safely lock itself down. No one else had the administrative override keys. They were hard-coded to my unique digital identity. Without me, the software would literally freeze within a day. The second part of my leverage was financial, and it was far more destructive for Bradley. I swiped across the screen to view the draft of the impending Vanguard Holdings investment agreement. Because I was intimately involved in the technical due diligence process, I knew the exact contents of every single clause. Carter Pendleton, the legendary billionaire founder of Vanguard Holdings, was an old-school tech realist. He had made his fortune in the early days of software engineering, and he didn't care about empty marketing buzzwords or Bradley's polished, colorful slide decks. Carter was investing $120 million into Apex for one reason only: my proprietary architecture and my proven ability to run it. Carter had personally insisted on inserting a strict keyman clause into the final contract. For those who don't know corporate terminology, a keyman clause is a legal safety net for investors. It explicitly states that the success of the investment depends entirely on specific, irreplaceable people. The clause in our contract stated that if Sarah Jenkins was terminated, reassigned, or stripped of her operational control without her direct written consent prior to the execution of the funding wire, the current company valuation was instantly invalidated. In plain English, it meant that if they fired me before the money was transferred, Vanguard retained the unconditional right to cancel the contract and pull the entire $120 million check back immediately. Bradley had been so focused on executing his petty personal vendetta that he hadn't bothered to read the closing conditions of the biggest deal in the company's history. He assumed that as vice president, his word was absolute law. He thought that because he had the power to fire an employee, he had the power to control the consequences. He had absolutely no idea that by casting me out, he had just legally dissolved the contract that was meant to keep Apex alive. I started my car, shifted into drive, and slowly rolled out of the Apex parking lot. I didn't want to go home just yet. I wanted a front row seat for the show. I drove directly across the street to a quiet, high-end coffee shop with large glass windows that looked straight at our corporate building. I walked inside, ordered a double shot of espresso, and sat down at a small table in the corner. I opened my personal laptop and connected to the secure Wi-Fi network. I operated with the cold, deliberate precision of an engineer fixing a critical system error. There was no anger in my movements, only logic. First, I opened my private encrypted messenger app and contacted Marcus, a trusted senior developer who had worked under me for 4 years. Marcus was a brilliant engineer who despised the toxic corporate theater Bradley had introduced. "Hey, Sarah." His message popped up immediately. "Everyone is completely sick to their stomachs down here. Nobody can believe what he just did over the intercom. Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine, Marcus," I typed back calmly. "Do me a quick favor. Did anyone happen to record Bradley's broadcast? The system automatically archives all internal audio announcements on the security server," Marcus replied. "Give me 30 seconds. Less than a minute later, a clean audio file landed in my inbox. I downloaded it and played it through my headphones. Bradley's voice sounded incredibly clear, incredibly smug, and incredibly guilty. It was undeniable proof of my immediate termination without cause, announced publicly to the entire workforce. Next, I opened my email client and drafted a formal, high-priority notification addressed directly to Carter Pendleton's personal chief of staff. I kept the tone impeccably professional and completely detached from any personal emotion. I adhered strictly to the legal notification guidelines outlined in the investor covenants. I stated clearly that as of 2:15 p.m., I had been terminated from my role as Director of Operations and Lead Product Architect via a public intercom announcement by Vice President Bradley Caldwell. I attached the audio file to the email, labeling it as definitive evidence of a material breach of the operational stability clauses. Finally, it was time for the technical piece of the puzzle. I logged into my remote admin security portal. Because I was technically no longer an employee of Apex as of 15 minutes ago, I was legally obligated to remove my personal digital assets from the company network. I didn't hack into their servers, and I didn't delete a single line of their database code. That would be illegal. Instead, I simply unlinked my personal cryptographic token from the automated nightly server renewal script. I revoked my own security credentials, following standard protocol for a terminated worker. By doing this, the system would fail its security check when the midnight timer hit, triggering an automatic data lockdown. I took a slow sip of my hot espresso and checked my phone. The digital numbers shifted to exactly 2:28 p.m. The closing video conference between the Apex Executive Suite and Vanguard Holdings was scheduled to begin in precisely 2 minutes. I hit the send button on my email to Carter Pendleton, closed my laptop screen with a soft click, and leaned back in my chair. The trap was completely set, the weapon was fully loaded, and Bradley Caldwell was about to walk into the boardroom with a giant smile on his face, totally unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. While I sat across the street sipping my espresso, the top floor of the Apex headquarters was turning into a party. Thanks to a few quick text updates from Marcus, I could picture the scene perfectly. Bradley had gathered the entire executive suite, including our chief executive officer, into the main glass-walled boardroom. They weren't preparing for a tough negotiation. They genuinely believed the hard work was already done. Bradley had ordered several bottles of expensive vintage champagne to celebrate the closing of the deal. The sharp, festive sound of popping corks echoed loudly through the executive wing, signaling their unearned victory. Bradley stood at the head of the long mahogany table, completely basking in the spotlight. He was loudly boasting about his brilliant strategic moves to anyone who would listen. He explained that a modern, aggressive corporate culture required a leader who wasn't afraid to cut the dead weight. He literally used my public firing over the office intercom as his prime example. He told the board that by removing an expensive, old-school director like me, he had instantly improved the company's projected profit margins. He claimed this move would prove to the investors that Apex was lean, mean, and ready to scale globally under his supreme guidance. Our CEO was completely enamored by Bradley's superficial charisma. The CEO was a man who loved flashy presentations and big promises, but rarely looked into the daily operational realities of his own company. He raised his crystal glass high in the air, leading the room in a grand toast to Bradley's decisive and bold leadership. The other executives nodded in eager agreement, desperate to please the new golden boy of the company. They genuinely believed they were minutes away from becoming incredibly wealthy. They thought my 5 years of sleepless nights and architectural breakthroughs were just a stepping stone for their own massive bonuses. At one point, Bradley turned to the chief marketing officer and let out another one of his signature, condescending laughs. He joked that I was probably sitting in my car right now, crying my eyes out and regretting that I hadn't been more cooperative with his management style. The level of corporate hubris in that room was completely suffocating. It was a perfect display of modern executive blindness, where flashy optics and loud talking completely replaced actual structural integrity and respect for the workers. They all simply assumed that the Vanguard money was already moving through the clearinghouse banking network into the company account. They had absolutely no idea that their entire celebration was taking place on a fragile foundation of sand. And they had no idea that at that exact moment, Carter Pendleton's private jet had just touched down on the tarmac. The billionaire investor stepped out of the aircraft, opened his secure tablet, and saw my high-priority email waiting at the top of his inbox. He didn't ignore it. He didn't forward it to an assistant. Carter clicked on the attached audio file and listened intently to the static, heavy recording of Bradley's smug voice broadcasting my firing across the entire company. The trap had just sprung tightly shut, and the clueless executives were still pouring more champagne. They had no clue the party was already over. Carter was a disciplined businessman who absolutely despised corporate bullies. Hearing an executive humiliate a brilliant founder like that disgusted him to his core. He immediately called his entire lead legal team, his expression turning to absolute pure ice. The $120 million check was practically torn to shreds before Bradley could even finish his very first glass of champagne. At exactly 2:30 p.m., the grand corporate illusion shattered with terrifying, violent speed. Inside the boardroom, the chief financial officer was hovering over his laptop, waiting to refresh the institutional banking portal to confirm the incoming funds. Instead of a green confirmation banner, a sharp, high-pitched error tone beeped from his speakers. A bright red text notification popped up on his screen, reading, "Wire transfer status, canceled and revoked by sender." The CFO blinked in absolute disbelief, his breath catching in his throat. Before he could even open his mouth to speak or alert the room, the ambient noise throughout the entire headquarters shifted completely. Down on the engineering and customer support floors, loud, piercing infrastructure alarms began to sound. Through the clear glass of the boardroom, the executives watched in horror as every single employee monitor simultaneously flashed bright, solid red. My remote withdrawal of my security token had triggered the system's emergency protocol. The automated logistics grid had officially failed its daily validation check. The system assumed it was under cyber attack and automatically locked every single user out of the core routing platform, freezing all real-time client shipping data around the globe. Hundreds of delivery trucks on highways worldwide suddenly stopped receiving routing updates. The festive celebration atmosphere in the boardroom vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating panic. Right at that second, Bradley's smartphone began vibrating violently on the polished mahogany table. The caller ID displayed the name of Vanguard's lead corporate counsel. Simultaneously, the CEO's tablet lit up with a direct, personal email from Carter Pendleton. The sheer brutal speed of the collapse caught them entirely off guard. The smug smiles were wiped from the executives' faces, replaced by a pale, breathless dread as they realized their entire operational infrastructure was completely dead in the water and their financial lifeline had been cut. Bradley tried desperately to maintain his cool posture, but his hands were visibly trembling as he reached for his phone. He stammered loudly, trying to tell the room that it was just a minor, temporary technical glitch in the system. He asserted that our engineering team would have it fixed in 5 minutes, but the sweat breaking out on his forehead told a completely different story. The sheer gravity of the disaster was starting to crush his fragile corporate ego. He was realizing that his grand power move had triggered something he couldn't control. Outside the boardroom doors, the office was turning into a scene of utter chaos. Clients were already calling the support lines in a frenzy, demanding to know why their entire supply chains had suddenly gone offline. The CEO stared blankly at his tablet screen, his face draining of all color, as he read Carter Pendleton's brutal message line by line. Bradley looked around the room, desperately seeking an ally, but every single executive was staring at him with pure horror and growing fury. The empire they thought they owned was dissolving right before their eyes, and the man who had loudly claimed he was saving the company was now trapped in his own disaster. The expensive champagne that had tasted incredibly sweet just moments before now sat completely forgotten, growing warm and flat in their expensive crystal glasses. Bradley opened and closed his mouth repeatedly like a fish out of water, trying to find any words that could somehow save him from this nightmare. But there were absolutely no words left to find. The proud corporate executioner had just become the primary casualty, and the complete public destruction of his entire professional career was officially starting right now. The CEO's hands shook violently as he reached over and slammed the speakerphone button on the center of the mahogany boardroom table. He dialed Carter Pendleton's direct, private line, his voice trembling with a frantic, desperate energy. When the line clicked open, the entire room held its breath, hoping against hope that this was all just a temporary misunderstanding. "Carter, thank you so much for picking up," the CEO stuttered out, trying to force a confident corporate tone. "We just noticed a slight anomaly with the wire transfer and a minor system glitch on our end. I have our Vice President Bradley Caldwell right here with me. We are completely ready to explain the situation and get everything smoothed over right away." The silence that followed was heavy and terrifying. When Carter Pendleton finally spoke, his voice didn't carry anger. It carried something much worse, a cold, absolute finality that cut through the warm room like a block of ice. He didn't allow the CEO to offer a single extra word or a smooth executive excuse. "I am not interested in your explanations," Carter said, his voice echoing clearly through the speakerphone. "And I am certainly not interested in hearing a single word from Bradley Caldwell. When Vanguard Holdings agreed to invest $120 million into Apex, we made our terms incredibly clear. Our investment was completely and explicitly contingent on the technical stability, the proprietary architecture, and the operational leadership of Sarah Jenkins. Her name is written into the foundational covenants of the Master Investment Agreement as a non-negotiable keyman." Bradley leaned forward, his face pale but his desperate arrogance still trying to survive. "Mr. Pendleton, if I may," Bradley chimed in, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah Jenkins was just an old-school operations director. She was holding our scaling metrics back. "I made a strategic decision to upgrade our leadership culture." "Silence," Carter snapped, and the authority in his voice made Bradley physically flinch backward. "Do you think I am an idiot, Bradley? Do you think I do not perform thorough due diligence on the companies I fund? Suddenly, a loud burst of static came through the speakerphone, followed by a familiar, booming sound. Carter had held a recording device up to his microphone. The entire boardroom listened in absolute, horrified silence as Bradley's own voice echoed back to them. It was the recording of the public intercom announcement from 15 minutes ago. Sarah Jenkins is terminated from her position. Effective right now, you have exactly 10 minutes to clear your desk. The recording finished with Bradley's soft, arrogant chuckle. You broadcasted the public humiliation of the most critical technical asset in your entire infrastructure, Carter said, his tone dipping into pure disgust. A company managed by such reckless, short-sighted, and deeply arrogant amateurs is not a growth opportunity. It is a catastrophic, toxic liability. You do not respect the talent that built your engine, which means you have no capacity to run it. As of this second, Vanguard Holdings is officially declaring the Series C funding agreement completely null and void. The deal is dead. Do not call my office again. The line went dead with a sharp click. For 3 seconds, nobody in the boardroom moved. Then, the ceiling alarms continued to blare, and the room erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos. The CEO turned on Bradley with a raw, screaming rage that literally shook the glass walls of the room. He slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, screaming at Bradley for destroying a 5-year-old company in less than 15 minutes of personal failure. Bradley's face turned completely white, his skin looking like chalk. All of his defensive lies, his smooth corporate buzzwords, and his superficial charisma completely fell apart under the furious glare of the board members. The CFO looked up from his red flashing laptop screen, his voice trembling as he delivered the final mathematical truth. Without the $120 million, and with the entire global logistics platform locked down by the expired security certificate, the company would face total operational and financial bankruptcy within 48 hours. The board instantly voted to strip Bradley of all corporate authority, fired him on the spot, and threatened massive lawsuits for gross negligence and absolute ruin. Exactly 1 hour after I walked out of the Apex building, my personal phone began to vibrate on the coffee shop table. The screen showed the CEO's direct number. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso before sliding the screen to answer. The moment I put the phone to my ear, I could hear the absolute panic in his breath. The confident, wealthy executive was completely gone. He was practically weeping into the receiver, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic energy. "Sarah, please, you have to help us," the CEO begged, his words tumbling out over each other. "Bradley has been fired and removed from the property. It was all a massive, terrible mistake. We need you back in the building right now to unlock the system. If you come back, I will give you Bradley's exact title. You will be the new Executive Vice President of Global Operations. We will give you a permanent seat on the board of directors, and we will triple your current base salary effective immediately. Please, Sarah, just save the company." I listened to his frantic pleading with a calm, detached smile on my face. For 5 years, I had given this company my blood, sweat, and tears, and they had allowed a superficial bully to humiliate me over a loudspeaker just to save a few dollars on overhead. They only valued my presence and my intellect when the entire system was completely broken and burning down around them. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice completely smooth and steady. But as Bradley loudly told the entire company over the office intercom, my management style is outdated. Good luck with the liquidation. I hung up the phone, cutting off his desperate cries mid-sentence. I closed my laptop, packed it into my bag, and walked out of the coffee shop. I drove downtown to a private, exclusive dining club. I had a pre-scheduled dinner reservation, and I didn't want to be late. When I arrived, Carter Pendleton was already waiting for me at a quiet corner table. Over expensive steaks and wine, Carter and I finalized a brand new, far more lucrative arrangement. Carter wasn't interested in throwing good money after bad by trying to save a toxic, poorly managed sinking ship like Apex. Instead, he wanted to invest directly in the actual architect. We shook hands on a deal where Vanguard Holdings agreed to fund my brand new, completely independent logistics operations firm with the exact same $120 million. Within less than a month, without its core software and without its funding, Apex Logistical Solutions officially filed for bankruptcy. My brand new company swooped in during the liquidation auction. We purchased their entire proprietary intellectual property and all major global client contracts for absolute pennies on the dollar. We easily absorbed their operations, achieving total market domination within our first quarter. Bradley Caldwell was permanently and completely blacklisted from the global venture capital community. His name became a hilarious cautionary tale, forever synonymous with the most catastrophic failure within our industry's entire history. I won my total market dominance not by screaming or engaging in loud corporate theater. I won through quiet preparation, ironclad contracts, strategic patience, and the truly devastating, unchallengeable power of absolute, flawless operational competence.